reiterate what I just talked about. Is the, come on. Okay, now I'm okay, good. So what I wanted to just talk about briefly for the people on YouTube who the technical difficulties have been going on for the last 20 minutes that I've been trying to connect. So I do want to just run over this again because I want it to be recorded and up on the YouTube channel as well. So I just simply talked about daylight savings time and make sure you have your clock set. You don't want to be late for work and for your appointments with your clients. And then also, if you have not participated in the poll for the retreat on this year, or the social work meetup, if you haven't voted in the poll, there's a poll on the top of the day-to-day social work page on Facebook. We will have either in the northern states and a second meetup in the southern states, or we'll have one meetup together with everybody in a central location. We have a lot of people that are, what other apps do you use? I'm not sure what you mean. I use Facebook and I use YouTube to connect here. Maybe I do need to look at something else, because I think the issue here is though that I have a whole lot of tabs open, which was slowing down my connection. But yeah, those are the two that I use because I'm really not savvy with all this technology, but Facebook and YouTube. But yeah, so I want to make sure that everybody votes in that poll so that we can get everything together as far as planning. Either we're going to plan two separate meetups, one in the north and in the south, or we're going to plan one where we all meet centrally. Okay, so that's that. Quick update on tutoring. Tutoring is back. Live one-on-one sessions are back. If you want a live tutoring session, go on the website, daytodaysocialwork.wix.com/my-site, and that will be in the description box. So you can go on there and request a free consultation where I will send you questions and we'll talk about what you think your weaknesses and strengths are, and just a lot of questions that you have to answer. It's nothing that you have to write out long, drawn out sentences and questions to kind of give me an idea of what's going on with you. And then I will give you feedback, and then you can decide if you want to book tutoring or not. Tutoring rate for 2019 is going to stay the same. Again, like I said last week, I will have another option where I will do one live session for a discounted rate, one Saturday a month. So be on the lookout for the video update on tutoring, which I'm going to make as soon as I get the other videos uploaded for the pre-recorded tutoring series. So I have three or four new question sets and sessions that I'm going to add to the pre-recorded series that I had for last year. I looked through some things, talked with some people. The content is still kind of the same as far as being able to use some of last year's questions, but I also updated and got some new questions, and the tutoring overall, as well as the pre-recorded tutoring series, is more clinically based. So I'm getting those videos together. I'll have that hopefully within the next week or two. But live one-on-one sessions are, and I will be making an updated tutoring video for 2019. The pre-recorded tutoring series, the price will not change on that, and I'll probably will continue to offer a special that I currently have going on until I get those new videos up and going to add to the package. Again, with these 4 new sessions, which is probably going to equal out to be 3.5 to 4 hours of additional content on top of the 7 hours that are already in the pre-recorded series, I'm not going to change the rate on that for this year. I don't see a reason to. It's been affordable for most people, and I don't see a reason to add an increase on that. So all that tutoring stuff, again, go to the website, daytodaysocialwork.wix.com/my-site, and I will put that in the description box so that you can go and check that out and get you a free consultation. Forward. Another thing, so if you go on the website, I am offering a new service. It's going to be personal consulting. It's similar to counseling. It's not counseling. I am a licensed master's level social worker. I'm currently under supervision for my licensed independent social worker clinical practice in the state of South Carolina, but I am not doing any independent counseling or anything similar to that until I get or anything close to that until I get my independent license. So right now I'm working on my 100 clinical supervision, which of course you have to have 50 in a group, or 50 have to be one-on-one with your supervisor, and then the other 50 can be in a group setting. I'm currently working on those 100 hours, and I should be done around the end of next year. And I'm also taking the psychodiagnostics class, which is also a requirement in the state of South Carolina. You have to take psychopathology, psychodiagnostics, and ethics. I took psychopathology in in grad school, and I'm currently taking psychodiagnostics, which I was doing some work on that before I went live. And it's very interesting material, and I'm learning a lot. So, and then I'll take the ethics class. So I'm working on all of this stuff so that I can finally sit for the clinical exam, which it could be called something different in your state. Licensed independent social worker, clinical practice is what it's called in South Carolina. So, but with the personal consulting, it's going to be like counseling, but it's not counseling. It's not going to be therapy or anything like that. It's kind of like coaching. So if you have any kind of issues that you want to talk about, anything that you are life and that kind of thing, I'm not an expert on life. I put on the website the services that the topics and the areas that I plan to cover in those sessions. I'm not going to talk about anything marital because I'm not married. I'm not going to talk about anything specific to parenting because I'm not a parent. But if you have any other issues, if you want to know what my resume is, it's on the website, and there's a link to my LinkedIn page, and there's also other information about me, or if you have any additional questions, you can ask. So make sure to check that out. That is a service that I'm providing at a very, very, very low cost because it's not counseling, it's personal consulting, kind of like life coaching, but I'm not calling it life coaching either because I'm not an expert on life. Okay, so now that all of that is out of the way, let's get down to business. Before I start though, does anybody have any questions? Because what we're going to cover tonight is some very good information on IEPs and 504 plans and the autism spectrum. So any questions before we get started? And let me just check Facebook and see if anybody has any questions here. Which I don't know if Facebook is still up or not. But if you happen to be on Facebook, because I can't tell if it's up and running or not, but if you can see and hear this and you're on Facebook, come on over to the YouTube page so I can see if you have any questions. All right, so let's get to it. So accommodations, 504 plans, and IEPs. Good information. Of course, anything that I discuss is stuff that you can find on your own, but I went to a conference last week or the week before last and got a lot of good information. So anything that we talk about is stuff that you can find online yourself. But I also did some extra research just because I didn't want to go off of just what was given to me at the conference. And I also want to make sure that I'm giving you accurate information. So we're going to talk about the IEPs and the 504 plans. This is something that you may have to know for the exam, to be honest, because hearing the license exam country, it's a lot on school social work and community social work since the spring of last year. They're going to have a new exam out this year or sometime soon. But it's important to know a lot of the school stuff because a lot of people have talked about having school information and community information. So most people may have heard of the IEPs and the 504 plans. Some people haven't, and I guess that depends on if you work with children and if you work within a school system or if you work with kids and where their education is involved. So I do want to just start with facts that these two, the 504 plan and the IEPs were born out of. So so just to start off, an IEP is an individualized education plan where there are certain things put in place for children with special needs or learning disabilities. And then the 504 plan is an accommodation plan, same thing for children with disabilities. So the 504 plan, it comes from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's one of those things that you might need to know for the exam, because they do focus on these acts and laws and legislation and that kind of thing. So the 504, Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act was the first disability civil rights law to be enacted in the United States. It prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in programs that receive federal financial assistance, like schools, and set the stage for enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Section 504 works together with the ADA and the IDEA, which we'll talk about in a second, to protect children and adults with disabilities from exclusion and equal treatment in the schools, jobs, and the community. So that's what the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is. Of course, I will put a link to this information if you want to do a little bit further search, or you can Google it yourself and find some information. But that's just in a nutshell what that is. It's a law that was, it's a disability civil rights law that was enacted to make sure that people with disabilities are not discriminated against. Now, the IDEA is another act, and that is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So what do we need to know about the IDEA? At a glance, and it's the Individuals with Disabilities Act. The acronym is FOR, so make sure you know that. That might be something on the exam if you see that. IDEA or IDEA is Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law that requires schools to serve the education eligible studies. The schools must find and evaluate students suspected of having disabilities at no cost to the parent. This is the act that the IEP falls up under. So the IEP and the 504 plan are no cost to the parents. It's provided by the school. Not every child with a learning disability or attention issues will qualify under the IDEA. In other words, just because a child has a learning disability doesn't mean that they necessarily have an IEP, an individualized education plan. So that's just important to know the background of where these two acts come from, or these two documents come from. So what is an IEP? What is the 504 plan? What is the difference? So a very good website to get information from about both of these, learning and attention issues with children with disabilities in the education system, is understood.org. And I will put some links in the description box that you can refer back to for information. So I got a lot of information from the conference, but before I talk about the information I got from the conference, I'm going to give you the different on that website, understood.org. So, and these are just going to be some back and forth about the IEP and the 504 plan, what they are, what they do, what laws apply, and who's eligible, and that kind of thing. So an IEP is a blueprint or a plan for a child's special education experience at school. The 504 plan is a blueprint or plan for how a child will receive access to learning at school. So the IEP, or the Individualized Education Plan, is kind of like a bigger plan versus the 504, which is more small. So the IEP focuses on, like it said, it's an educational blueprint. So they actually go and do an evaluation on the child, and it's done by a psychologist, and they look at whether or not the child has learning disabilities and how that affects that child's learning. With the 504 plan, it's more about accommodations. So the 504 plan is kind of a lesser plan than the IEP as far as intensity. The IEP focuses on education. It's very unique to the individual student, hence the name Individualized Education Plan. The 504 plan, and just to give you some real life, a real life example, a lot of the children that I work with, and as y'all probably know, I work in a pediatric setting with children with type 1 diabetes, and I help them with social aspects. So I go into the schools a lot and meet with principals and guidance counselors and Department of Mental Health people and all these people that are over the child's education. So the children that I work with, a lot of them have 504 plans because they have type 1 diabetes, which could be seen as a disability, and they are provided accommodations. So they have 504 plans. They don't necessarily need an IEP or individualized education plan just because they have type 1 diabetes. Now, if they also have, a learning disability that causes them causes them to be behind academically, for lack of a better phrase right now, then they could also have an IEP. And I also do have some children with IEPs because in addition to their type 1 diabetes, they also have a learning disability. So accommodations that the kids that I work with, they normally get with their 504 plan is just like I said, accommodations where if their blood sugar is too low or too high and they have to take a test, then they might be able to take that test at a later time. Or if they need to use the restroom, they might be able to go to the restroom, however many times period without having to ask like the other children do. So that's an accommodation. If they have visual issues due to their type 1 diabetes, and we know that that's the connection, then they might be able to have tests written in larger print or something like that. So those are just accommodations. The individualized education plan, the IEP, is different because it focuses more so on the academic side in addition to what accommodations might be needed. So what does the IEP do? The IEP provides individualized special education and related services to meet the unique needs of the child. And again, the services are provided at no cost to the parent. What does the 504 plan do? Provides services and changes to the learning environment to meet the needs of the child as adequately as other students. I hear them talk about the least restrictive environment. So the least restrictive environment is basically being in the classroom setting with other children who don't have a disability or don't have a learning disability or special need, basically. So if we can give this child a 504 plan and provide them with accommodations, they can stay in the least restrictive without having an IEP. If the child needs an IEP, even if they need an IEP, they still want them to be hopefully in the least restrictive. Without IEPs and these plans, it can affect which track the child is on for graduation, depending on what state you're in. In the state of South Carolina, children who have IEPs will probably more than likely be on a path of not getting a diploma. They might get a certificate of attendance. And again, this is not this is not covering everybody. I'm just saying what is typical. They would probably end up getting a certificate of attendance rather than a high school diploma. But in South Carolina, this school year, 2018-2019 school year, they've implemented a new track for students, which is called the South Carolina Credential, where if a child has an IEP, they could high school diploma, but they could still be employable after high school because they're on the credential track rather than the certificate track. And again, it's different for different states. So what laws apply to the IEP? Again, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA. It's a federal special education law for children with disabilities. And which law applies to the 504 plan? Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. That's a federal civil rights law to stop discrimination against people with disabilities. So making the difference too, not only for knowledge as you're working with kids and families, but also exam, because it could be something that pops up on your exam. So who is eligible for an IEP? To get an IEP, and again, this is a federal special education law for children with disabilities. So this is a federal, it covers all states. So I'm not just talking about South Carolina here. So a child has to have one or more of the 13 specific disabilities listed in the IDEA, or I'm just going to call it the IDEA Act. Learning and attention issues may apply. So I'm going to tell you what the 13 disabilities are that are listed in the act, that are covered under that act. So the child has to have one or more of the following. Let's pull this up here. Okay. So they have to have a specific learning. Well, let me just tell you exactly what it says here. So the Individuals and Disabilities Education Act requires schools to provide special education and related services to eligible students, but not every child with learning or attention issues qualify. To be covered, child's school performance must be adversely affected, and they have that in quotation marks, adversely affected. So you could have one of these 3 things or these 13 things, and their learning or their school performance is not affected because maybe they are highly functioning in whichever of these disabilities they have. So it has to be adversely affected by one of the 13 conditions. And it says for kids with learning and attention issues, 2 of these conditions are the most relevant. They are specific learning disability and other health impairment. We'll talk about that in a second. So the first, specific learning disability. So we know that in the DSM-5, they have broken it down when they did the revision in 2013, and it was pretty much out in the public by 2015. So a specific learning disability, the conditions in that group could fall into one of the following groups. And I don't think this is an all-inclusive list, but they could have dyslexia, dyscalculia, can't pronounce it, but basically trouble with calculations and numbers, auditory processing disorder, nonverbal learning disability. So those are just some of the things. The conditions in that group basically affect a child's ability to write, read, listen, speak, reason, or do math, basically. So that's number 1, a specific learning disability. The second thing, health impairment. That's something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So I told y'all last Sunday, that ADD used to be a term that we would use it just, I guess, out of familiarity, but now it's ADHD basically. So ADD is included on this spectrum of ADHD, but people still use ADD. So that would be an example. When I went to the training, they told us to make sure that if other health impairment is listed as the disability that the child has, to make sure that that is written out, because sometimes, even though a majority of the time, if it says other health impairment, it's going to be ADHD, but sometimes it could be something else. So make sure you know what that other health impairment is. The third thing is autism spectrum disorder. And we know autism spectrum disorder affects a child's social and communication skills and can also affect their behavior, but mostly it's their communication and social skills. The fourth thing is emotional disturbance, and they have that as anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and depression. And it says that some of these issues may also be covered under other health impairments. So it's not only ADHD as an other health impairment, but could also be some of those. Emotional disturbance. So I could see how depression and anxiety might be under there. Schizophrenia, bipolar, okay, I get it. All right. Number 5 is the speech or language impairment. Number 6 is a visual impairment, including blindness. Number 7 is deafness. Number 8 is hearing impairment. So, and let me just tell you what the difference is according to this. So deafness, it says children diagnosed with deafness have a severe hearing impairment. They aren't able to process language through hearing. And then it says hearing impairment. The term hearing impairment refers to a hearing loss not covered by the definition of deafness. This type of loss can change or fluctuate over time. Remember that being hard of hearing is not the same thing as having an auditory processing disorder. So this is stuff that you kind of want to just hear me talk about right now. And then when you get free time, look into the specifics of this stuff, because that's what I'm going to do too, because I have to know it too. Number 9 says deaf blindness. Diagnosed with deaf blindness have both hearing and visual impairments. Patient and other needs are so great that programs for the deaf or blind can't meet them. Number 10 says orthopedic impairment, and that's any impairment to the child's body, no matter what the cause, is considered an orthopedic impairment. Number 11 says intellectual disability. This type of disability, you have to have below average intellectual ability. So your intellectual quotient or your IQ. They may also have poor communication, self-care, and social skills. And it says that Down syndrome is an example of an intellectual disability. Number 12 is traumatic brain injury or TBI. And that could be caused by an accident or some kind of other physical force. And then number 13 is multiple disabilities. And it says a child with multiple disabilities has more than one condition covered by the IDEA or the IDEA. So having multiple issues creates educational needs that can't be met in a program for any one condition. And then they also talk about you may want to find out if your child is eligible for special education. If your child is found eligible, then the next step would be to create the IEP. Okay. And then also it says if your child isn't of school age yet, that you still want to learn about early intervention, or they call it EI, where if your child has signs of some kind of disability, intellectual developmental disability, you notice that before they get into school, then you still want to learn about the programs that are available for early intervention. So those are the 13 things covered under the IDEA, that the child must have at least one of those, and it has to adversely affect their school performance in order to get an IEP. And the second thing to get an IEP is that the disability must affect the child's educational performance and or ability to learn and the general education curriculum, leading to the need for specialized instruction. So if it causes them not to be able to perform at the average level of the general education curriculum or just business, then they might need an IEP. And so that is what makes them eligible. To get a 504 plan, there are 2 requirements. A child has to have any disability, which can include many learning and or attention issues. So any disability. And it says, number 2, the disability must ability to learn in the general education class. So we hear this general education. I'm gonna close this curtain because I have the blinds open. But we hear this general education. This is just normal classes that you would take in high school. It doesn't necessarily have to be college prep or advanced honors classes or anything like that, but just general education. So these are disabilities that affect the child's learning in a general curriculum. It also says Section 504 has a broader definition of disability than IDEA. It says a disability must substantially limit one or more basic life activities such as learning. That's why a child who doesn't qualify for an IEP might still be able to get a 504 plan. So that's what makes you eligible, those 2 things. Now, a parent can also ask for an independent educational evaluation by an outside expert. And for an IEP, the school district does not have to agree to that, but the parent can ask for it. The parents can also pay for an outside evaluation themselves, but the district may not give it, much credence because a lot of school districts like to use their own evaluations and stuff like that. So for the 504 plan, they don't allow for the parents to ask for an independent educational evaluation. But of course, the parent can pay for that themselves outside of the school system. So let's see what else here. So this is very important. Who creates the program and the plan for the child? So this is very, very important information. So there are strict legal requirements about who participates for the IEP. This is legal. This is a federal program. Legality is involved in this. So an IEP is created by the Iep Team. And the Iep Team must include all of these people: the parent or parents, at least one of the child's general education teachers, math, science, history, whatever, at least one special education teacher, and the school psychologist or other specialist who can interpret evaluation results. So of course, the child has to have an evaluation to determine if they need an IEP. So they need to have a school psychologist or somebody who can interpret the results. And they also have to have a district representative with authority over special education services. And then, of course, you want to include the child. I think they said here in South Carolina, and I'm not sure if it's the same everywhere, but the child starting at age 13, the child can participate in the IEP meetings. And it's very important as social workers that we advocate for the parent and the child, for the child to be present, because we are all about self-determination. If a child is 13, they need to know what's going on with their individualized education plan. They need to have a say-so, and it's good to prepare them for being in charge of their education. You also want the child to know that they can lead their IEP meeting. So, I mean, this is who this meeting's about. It's about the child. So a lot of times they will encourage the child to lead the meeting. But I've been to an IEP meeting before, and this was when I was very green, as they call it. I didn't really know what was going on, but I did go as an advocate for a parent who had a child with an IEP, and she didn't know what was going on either. And she didn't really say much. I don't even think the child was in the room. So had I known the information that I know now, I would have been able to advocate better for this family. But it was a very serious, well, I won't say it was very serious. The content of the meeting was serious, but it was a lot of people at the table talking about all of these things. And so it's important for everybody to be in the room and to know what we're going to talk about before we get there. So it says, with a few exceptions, the entire team must be present for the IEP meeting. Everybody has to be there. All of those people listed. The parent has to be there, definitely. The child doesn't have to be there, but they do want the child to be there. Now, with the 504 plan, it says the rules about who's on the 504 team are less specific than they are for the IEP. Of course, because the IEP is more individualized and it's more geared toward the education, whereas the 504 is more geared toward the accommodations. So it says a 504 plan is created by a team of people who are familiar with the child and who understand the evaluation data and special service options. This might include the parent, the general and special education teacher, and the school principal. So the psychologist and the district representative don't have to be there for the 504 plan. So what's in the plan? For the IEP, it's basically learning goals. And they gave us a copy of the one that they used here in South Carolina, but I don't know what I did with it since last week. But but still I know what's in it. So, okay. The IEP sets learning goals for the child and describes the services that the school will give the child. It's a written document. It's pages long. And some of the things that are most important that are included in the IEP is the child's present level of academic and functional performance, or how he or she is doing in school. That's very important. All of this stuff is written out in different sections on the IEP, which again is a document and it has to be written out. Annual education goals for how the child will track their progress, the services that the child will get. This might include any special education, extended school year services, whereas most kids go 180 days, in some places more because they might have year-round school. But if you are only going to school for 180 days, that child might need an extension on those days. They also have in the IEP the timing of the services, when they start, how often they occur, and how long they'll last. Any accommodations. So it's very important that we understand the difference between an accommodation and a modification. So an accommodation is changes to the child's learning environment. Like I said, if the child needs larger print to be able to read because they have a visual impairment, which is one of those 13 things that was on that list, that's an accommodation. A modification changes what the child is expected to learn or know. So this is changes in curriculum, which is why it can take the child off of diploma track if the curriculum is changed from the general education curriculum. That's important to know. So you need to make sure you know the differences between a modification and an accommodation. So I'm going to also put the information too. So just to beat the dead horse, a modification is a change to what your child is taught or expected to do in school. Modifications are not accommodations. Accommodations change how your child learns or how the child learns. Only students with an IEP or a 504 plan can have modifications. So anybody else, if you don't have an IEP or a 504 plan, you can't have modifications from the general education curriculum. That's important to know. Let's see. Then they give some examples, but again, I'll put the link down there because I don't want to read through all that and waste your time. So, and then also another thing in IEP is how the child will participate in standardized tests. So, you know, the end of school year testing, or they call it EOC or something like that, different thing in different places, of course. And then how the child will be included in general education classes and school activities. So those are all the things that must be included in the IEP. For the 504 plan, there's no standard 504 plan. Unlike the IEP, the 504 plan does not have to be written, and it basically includes the specific accommodations. So the child has type 1 diabetes. They can go to the restroom at any time without asking. They can carry snacks. And these are things that other kids can't do because they don't have this disability. They can take a test at a different time. They can sit out in gym if their blood sugar is a certain number, that kind of thing. It also names who will provide each service. So all of the teachers have to know, of course, about the 504 plan and the IEP. And it also, the 504 plan also names the person responsible for ensuring that the plan is implemented. So then we talk about the next thing here is notice to the parents. So, and a parent can ask for an IEP meeting at any time. Like normally they review it annually. They review the IEP annually, and that's literally 365 days later. So if they are 367 days or 370 days, when they try to review the plan, they're out of commission. They're out of compliance, rather. With the legal aspect or what the legal requirement is for. Also, a child can be reevaluated every 3 years. And I said can be because I'm not sure if they have to be, but I'll find that out. It's somewhere written on here. But yeah, so you have to give the parents notice. When the school wants to change services or placement, it has to tell the parent beforehand in writing, and they can't just go and change stuff without giving a prior written notice to the parent. Notice is also required for any IEP meetings or evaluations. So that's important to know too. Parents also have stay put rights to keep services in place while there's a dispute. So if the child has certain services in place and there's a dispute going on, the parent wants the child to keep those services until the dispute is resolved, then those services stay in place. Also, when it comes to notice for the parents for the 504 plan, the school must notify parents about evaluations or significant changes in the placement. The notice doesn't have to be in writing, but most schools do it anyway. So you can see that the 504 plan is not as intense as the IEP, because I think it's because it just focuses on accommodations rather than modifications, which, you start changing up the curriculum, then it's just a whole different ballgame. So, but again, they have to let the parents know. And again, the parent can request an IEP meeting at any time. They don't have to wait until the 365 days, and they don't, I guess if they want to have one every month, they can. So it's all about making sure the social worker, when we look at it from our perspective, making sure that the social worker knows this information to be able to advocate for the parents in case the parents don't know. And also you want to encourage the parents to educate themselves on this kind of stuff too. So parental consent, for an IEP, a parent must consent in writing for the school to evaluate the child. Parents must also consent in writing before the school can provide services in an IEP. So all this stuff has to be written. It's legal, it's federal, that kind of thing. For the 504 plan, a parent's consent is required for the school district to evaluate the child. So it is up to the school to provide these services at no cost to the parent. And you also want to make sure that the child has the proper evaluation. And again, the parent can pay an outside person, but we don't know if the school district is going to take that outside evaluation over their own. And again, when we talk about how often the IEP and the 504 is reviewed and revised, the Iep team must review the IEP again at least once a year, 365 days. The student so it says the student must be reevaluated every 3 years to determine whether or not the services are still needed. So every 3 years must be reevaluated. For the 504 plan, it's generally reviewed every year. And the reevaluation can be done is done every 3 years or when needed. If there's an issue with the 504 plan, the parents have a right to mediation, a civil lawsuit, a lawsuit in general, a state complaint, resolution sessions, and due process complaints. And that is all given under the IDEA. So if a parent wants to dispute something in the 504 plan, same thing. They also can have an impartial hearing. Let's see. And then lastly, the funding and costs for the IEP and the 504 plan, both are received at no cost to the parents. There's no charge for the services. And for the IEP specifically, though, it says states receive additional funding for eligible students. And then for the 504, it says states do not receive extra funding for eligible students, but the federal government can take funding away from programs, including schools, that don't comply. And it says IDEA funds can't be used to serve students with the 504 plan. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, the differences between the 504 plans and the IEPs. Also, I do want to point out that if there is a problem with the 504 plan, the parent can make a complaint to the Office of Civil Rights, because again, we know that the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is a civil rights law. So, all right, let me check and see if anybody has any questions. Any questions, anybody, before, and I'm going to end this. I know I started late, so I wanted to end late or not in late, but in later, so I can get all this information out. Any questions or anything before I give a little bit more information? And again, I'm going to put all of these links that you can find additional information on this stuff in the description box. So the stuff that I got from the conference that I went to, it's all that same stuff. So I'm just going to glance through this and make sure that there's nothing extra. Accommodation helps create environment to enable the child to perform at his or her best. Let's see. They talked about self-contained classes, interventions. Now, what is this? Because this is not IEP stuff. This looks like. So what I'm going to do too is we're not going to have time for me to talk about the autism spectrum. So we'll do that next Sunday because, like I said, this is a lot of good information. But I'll save that for next Sunday. But I do want to give a little bit more information about the IEP before I get off of here. Let's see. We talked about the team. We talked about the parents are on the team. They must truly be individualized. The child should participate in decision-making as early as possible. You want to make sure that you empower the parent before the meeting. So you always want to let the parent know, or the parent should know, parent and the advocate or the social worker in this aspect of our participation in this. You want to know the purpose of the meeting, who's going. You want to review the child's record, the current IEP, recent evaluations, all that kind of stuff before the meeting. You also can request records of the IEP. If you don't have them, the evaluation, all that kind of stuff, you can request that beforehand. You want to encourage the parent to write down questions that they have beforehand, because you get in there, they start talking about all this other stuff, you might forget. So it's good to go prepared. Like, this is an important meeting. I would even encourage the child, especially if they're older and they're more highly functioning, let the child know that this is about them. This is their meeting, and they can lead the meeting if they want to. Of course, they're not going to be running the show and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, if someone says, well, hey, we want this child, we think the child needs to ride the special, I don't know if they call it special education bus or what, but if the child needs to ride, or if they think that the child needs to ride a special bus as opposed to the regular bus, which I hate saying regular, but you know, and the child doesn't think that they need that, unless they have like a wheelchair or some special equipment, you know, then the child can speak up and say, hey, I don't want to ride that bus. I want to ride the regular bus. I don't feel any kind of way about riding the regular bus. I don't think I need that kind of accommodation. They don't have to. So, let's see what else. Research the student's disability. A lot of parents don't know enough about their child's disability, including the parents that I work with type 1 diabetes. Like, they get all this education, but they don't do their own research. So encourage people to do their own research. And I will say, though, you know, if you have a child that's in school, a lot of parents do their own research. I mean, if they really care, and a lot of parents do. There are some that don't, and I work with some of them. But some people don't care. A lot of parents do care. And I mean, even at that conference, they had a lot of parents there. It was focused on children with special needs and disabilities, and things got heated in some of those breakout sessions. Like, people were really upset and going off on the presenters. And I'm like, lady, calm down, because nothing that this lady can do about these laws, but I understand your frustration. But, you know, encourage the parents to research their child's disability, because you are your child's best advocate. I tell people that all the time when I'm working with people. You are your child's best advocate. So you need to know what is going on with your child, and, you know, research things, correct people if they give you wrong information where you know that something is wrong. Because a lot of times, some professionals, social workers included, doctors included, they'll just tell you stuff and they don't really know. And that's why I'm always looking for accurate information, because I don't want to be out here spouting out stuff and telling y'all stuff and I don't know what I'm talking about. That's not good, because I don't want my name on anything that's not correct. Okay, so know your child's strengths and weaknesses. Give examples. Give examples. So if a teacher or somebody in the IEP meeting is telling you your child is weak in this area, and your child is strong in this area, but you know that that's not the truth. This is your child. You spend a majority of time with the child. So you get in there and you say, okay, I understand that maybe the child is strong in this point or weak in this point while at school, but when they're at home, all of the other hours of the day and the week and the weekend, these seem to be their stronger suits. And I'm going to give you an example so that they can get a bigger picture, because you have a school psychologist, you have the people from the school district. They don't know your child. The teachers now, you know, the special education teacher that has to be there for the IEP, the general education teacher that has to be there for the IEP, they probably do have a good idea. But if you want to challenge that as the parent, then the parent can do that. Communicate concerns with the special ed teacher before the meeting, but request a draft of the IEP. And they made sure to tell us that there's a difference between a recent copy of the IEP and the draft of the IEP. So the recent copy of the IEP is what is already been implemented. And this is if you're going for an annual review. So the current copy or the recent copy of the IEP is what's currently implemented. The draft of the IEP is what the IEP team has already started working on to be implemented for this next year. So even though the draft, of course, is a draft and is not complete, the IEP team sometimes will go in and go ahead and start filling in stuff about the evaluation and filling in stuff about the services and accommodations and that kind of thing. So if they already have a draft that they've started for this next coming year, you can request a copy of that draft to see what they're already working on. Read assessment reports and ask about what you don't understand. Sometimes parents don't understand, professionals don't understand a lot of these assessments. So it's good to encourage the parent to ask questions. Some parents are not comfortable with asking questions because they don't understand, and they'll just say that they understand things and they don't really. So I'm always encouraging people to ask questions. The IEP meeting that I went to, even though at that time, which was probably like 7 years ago now, I had no clue about all this stuff, but I was still at the IEP meeting. I asked questions. I encouraged the parent to ask questions because the demographic that I was working with in this particular family, the mom was not educated beyond 5th grade or 8th grade or something like that. And so it was very hard for her to understand a lot of stuff. And the child definitely had a learning disability and he was falling behind in school. But side note, one thing about, and now that I'm thinking about it, that school district that I worked in at that point, and I wasn't working for the school, but for the population, was the homeless population I was working with, families. The school system there, they would pass children with all Fs. I remember this one kid, and I was talking to his mom, and I was like, well, let me see his report card. The child had all Fs, and they passed him to the next grade. And I wasn't even a parent, but I was really pissed off because I'm like, this child is going to get left behind, because how can you pass a child with all Fs, literally straight Fs, to the next grade? So I called the school, and the school had closed for the summer, and I was so mad. But the mom, she wasn't even upset like that. And I mean, she was upset, but she wasn't livid about it. And so, you know, even though we get in our feelings and we want the best for the clients and all that kind of stuff, the parent is the child's advocate and they make the final say so. So she didn't make a huge deal out of it, and I didn't either because she didn't want to. So, you know, sometimes we have to fall back a little bit and follow the parent's lead most of the time, because it's all about self-determination. But anyway, so let's see. That's that. So during the meeting, they say you should have an open mind going in, of course. I mean, that's a given. Be confident and ask questions. Ask about terms you don't understand. So people will be sitting at the table talking about all this stuff and BIPs and IEPs and FEAs and all this other stuff, using acronym at the hospital too. These nurses use all this nurse jargon, and I'm like, what is this acronym? And then I start giving them social work acronyms, and then they're like, what is this? But then I don't play with them like that, but I do it sometimes. But anyway, so yeah, ask about terms you don't understand. So if they're, if a parent has a 5th grade reading level and they're talking about the child's whatever, I mean, I don't even know a term that they might use that someone might not be familiar with. But if they're talking about, using all these terms, and if the social worker doesn't understand, the parent might not understand, and we need to be asking, like, what are you talking about? What is this? What is this acronym? What is this word? What does this mean? It says bring the current IEP during the meeting, of course, with questions marked in areas of concern. Bring any outside reports that you have on the child or any outside evaluations. Remember that the IEP is individualized and child-centered. This is about your child specifically. We don't want to hear about what another child's IEP says. This is about this individual child, and this plan is unique. Ask for time to consider important decisions if uncomfortable making on-the-spot decisions, or if you want to get more input. So let's say that the child has an IEP and they want you to take the child out of the least restrictive environment or the general education class and put them in a remedial class or self-contained class or whatever, but the parent is not really sure that they want to do that. It's okay for them to ask for more time to consider that, or if they want to get another opinion from somebody else, be it a family member or another professional that they work with this child. So make sure that the parent asks for more time if they need to consider important decisions. Says look for opportunities to express gratitude to teachers and staff, and be sure that everything discussed and agreed on for your child is written in the IEP. So they might say some things in the meeting, but then they don't write it in the IEP, so it's not implemented. So make sure that all of that's written. Then they start talking about invitations and notice of the meeting, which we already talked about. They have to send the invitation with enough advance notice to the parent to give them time to plan to attend the meeting. The parent can request the meeting at any time, of course. We talked about that. Parent response page to return to the school, yes or no, I'll attend. So the parent has to send a response and say yes or no, they'll attend. Also, they said if the parent can't attend in person because they don't have transportation, they can ask for a Skype meeting or to have it by phone. Or they also gave an example of if a parent or two parents have, a restraining order against the other, or one parent has a restraining order against the other, then one parent can be present by phone if the both of them are not allowed to be within a certain proximity of the other person. So they make accommodations also at the IEP meeting if necessary. And then they started talking about, they actually broke down the IEP and gave us an example. And I won't go through that because it was specific to South Carolina. And I know we have people from all different states. So that's it for tonight. Again, I didn't think it was going to take that long, but I do have some really, really good information about the autism spectrum that I'll cover next week. And, the signs to look for, the tools that they use for screening, and all of that good stuff. So I hope this session was very informative for you. Again, a lot of people don't know about the IEPs or the 504s because they don't work in the school setting, and they don't ever step foot into the school setting. So they don't really know a lot about it. So this is really good information. I'm going to put the links down to the some of the websites. And of course, these are federal acts, the IDEA, the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. This is stuff you can find online yourself. So do some research if you are interested in that. Again, I just want to make sure that everybody goes and votes on the day-to-day social work page for the social work meetup if you want to attend by this Friday, which is March? Tomorrow's the 11th. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, by the 15th of March, so that I can go ahead and start figuring out, if I need to plan 2 separate meetups or just one. And I'm going to go off of whatever is on that poll by Friday. Again, I'm doing the personal consulting. If that's something you're interested in, go to the website, and it's up on one of the tabs, and you can get information about that, and you can email on the website to inquire about that. And again, we did daylight savings time is now, I guess, and make sure your clocks are up to date. Any questions before we end for tonight? Questions, comments, anything about the exam or anything? To the person who asked about what apps I use, if you have a recommendation, then let me know. So if there are no questions or comments, I'll wait for a few seconds. But if there are no questions or comments, I will see y'all next week. We'll talk about the autism spectrum and whatever else may come across my attention this week. Let's check Facebook and see if anything popped up there. This video will be posted on the YouTube channel and the Facebook page, Day-to-Day Social Work. On Facebook, Day-to-Day on YouTube. Oh, hi, Gretchen. I'm just now seeing Facebook. Okay. And Val, I see Val. I don't know if they're still in here or not, but okay. All right, so nothing else. If you do have comments on Facebook, if you're watching this back, or on YouTube, if you're watching this back, you can leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll get the notification, and then I'll answer your questions on the from the notification. So y'all have a good week. Have a good night. And if God is willing, I will see y'all next Sunday.